Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Cian Hussey from the Institute of Public Affairs. Cian, thanks very much for your time tonight, and I really appreciate your report. And in my editorial, you heard me refer to Joe Hockey as describing them as lifters and leaners. You've talked about talkers and doers. Are they the same thing? And if not, what's the difference?
Well, I think there's a lot of overlap, and I think that Australians know there's kind of this intuitive sense of the people who are talkers and the people who are doers. The talkers are, the mid-level managers and the HR types and the politicians and the bureaucrats, while the doers are the people who are actually busy building the country, the bricklayers and the carpenters, the teachers and the nurses. And I think that while Joe Hockey was talking about the economy when he spoke about lifters and leaners, he actually borrowed that phrase from Sir Robert Menzies, and he was talking more about culture. And I think that that's one of the really key things with my report, and one of the key things of applying this framework of talkers and doers is understanding how it's impacting culture. It used to be the case that the talkers just told the doers what to do while they were at work. But I think that we're increasingly seeing the talkers telling the doers what to do in politics and in culture and society more broadly. And I think a real problem and actually undermines our democracy.
You're absolutely right. What we're seeing is this elite class, the people who think they know better than everyone else, tell others how they should be living their lives, telling them they should be making all these sacrifices, which none of them are prepared to do themselves. I mean, there's no greater example than what we've seen with the coronavirus panic, is it? We're getting all the bureaucrats telling us how to live our lives. Well, they're not impacted one bit. Their pay packets keep coming through, and they're not in small business employing people. It's a real example of the sorts of problems we have in this country, isn't it?
That's exactly right, Cory. And IPA research throughout the coronavirus pandemic has shown that public servants have actually received pay rises while private sector workers were struggling. And I think that there's a really important point here about the incentives for public servants. So they're able to tell everyone what to do and to enforce these lockdown measures, and they don't suffer any consequences. So it's a bit of a perverse incentive. But I think that you're right. The example of lockdowns is a perfect way of using this framework of talkers and doers. The talkers are detached from material reality. They spend all day sitting behind a laptop and they don't face any risks, whereas the doers, for example, someone working on a construction site who might have a brick fall on them at any moment, doers understand that to live means to accept and to balance risks. And I think that the lockdown strategy and this zero risk approach to COVID is a talking class policy. It's their preferred policy. And what they've done so effectively is enforce that policy on everyone else. So the doers, the mainstream Australians who understand that to live means to take risks, they were fine to accept that coronavirus poses a risk and they might have to change the way they live slightly. But to the talking class, that meant eliminate all risk, enforce lockdowns, force everyone to stay home, and we can just go to working from home from behind our laptops, so it doesn't impact us much. And they were happy to enforce that. What I'm really concerned about for the future is we've seen how effectively the talking class can impose their will on society with COVID. What's next? And the big example, obviously, is climate change, and I'm worried that that's what's going to happen next.
Yeah, Cian, beautifully put, I've got to tell you. But one of the things in your report was something that really struck home to me, and it sort of suggests that we are becoming bogged down in bureaucracy. It's cost us hundreds of billions of dollars over the last 20 years. But what it was about the number of supervisors, say, per nurse or per construction worker. And previously, 20 years ago, you'd have one supervisor and 30 or 40 or 50 nurses. Now it's down to 1 per 9. And it just suggests that we're getting to this managerial overclass that is strangling the prosperity in our economy.
That's exactly right. And I think one of the things we've seen within businesses is they've become bogged down in red tape, and the government has created all these rules and regulations and said you need to have diversity officers and you need to have these HR consultants. And what ends up happening is we've got all these people who are talking for a living and fewer people who are doing for a living. But we know that our economic prosperity comes from the doers. So we are really undermining our economy and our society by focusing too much on this talking class. And the example of construction workers and nurses is very illustrative of that. Like you say, we might have had tens of or dozens of construction workers, tradies on a construction site for each manager a few decades ago, but that number has decreased quite rapidly. And I think that, again, Australians know this. Any Australian out there, any tradie out there knows that things aren't what they used to be in this country. We've become bogged down in red tape and compliance officers and union reps on site and all these different managers who all seem to just stand around talking for a living rather than actually, picking up the tools and building something.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's not just red tape, it's black tape and green tape and every other colour tape, because they just seem to want to keep those in business and those who want to look after themselves on the back foot. It's really become a managerial class elitism that is, I think, going to send us backwards at a rate of knots. But you've built the cat on this. Your report is outstanding. I encourage everyone to go to the IPA website, download it, because it really does raise a lot of questions and how we can make some changes in this country. Really appreciate your time tonight. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Cory.